Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us this Tuesday morning at the Capitol on The Advance, talking about the week ahead. I'm Brandon Walton, senior editor at Texas Scorecard, joined, as always, by Michael Quinn Sullivan. Not always. I think you've missed a week.
I've missed a couple doing other things.
Yeah, but usually joined. And actually today, interesting change here because we're being joined by the Texas House that's actually going to be meeting at 10 o'clock here on a Tuesday, which, if you've been following the pacing of things, is actually quite a departure from where we were a few weeks ago, where they maybe come in the afternoon, or maybe in some cases not at all. They might come in on Wednesday. And so it really shows you just where we are in this session. Last Friday, we passed a major milestone.
We passed that milestone on Friday for filing legislation. All legislation has to be filed. Saturday was the first day that both chambers could be voting out any piece of legislation. Of course, neither one of them were in session on Saturday. So you're now at the point where the calendar has to be moving.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so what you see is when you look at what's happening in committee events, we are 60 days plus now into this session. There's 140 days. Not only was there a bill filing deadline, so no more bills, right? You can't file any more bills for the most part. But it's also open season that they can be debating, voting on any bill. There's no more excuses. Some lawmakers would tell people, well, we couldn't really do too much in the first 2 months, despite the fact that they actually could be doing some work. But now even those excuses are gone away. And what you actually see is that in both chambers, the House and the Senate, they've really started to stack up a lot of these committee hearings. They're meeting once a week. Some committees are even meeting sometimes twice a week, hearing a slate of bills, hearing testimony. This is really the part in the process where a lot of these bills start to be heard in committee. And so to the extent that there's a piece of legislation maybe that is a priority for you or something that you're following, I'd recommend that you go to Texas Legislature online, navigate that website, try to see if you can sign up for alerts, because those committee hearings, that's when you have the opportunity, if you so choose, to either come down and provide testimony, send in written testimony, and let them know exactly what you think about the bills they're considering.
Yeah, and I will also note in the Texas Senate, they're having hearings on legislation that is, you might think of as a little more kind of in the weeds, detailing, but in large part that's because the Texas Senate has already moved a lot of the big legislation, the property tax legislation, school choice legislation, bail reform. They've moved all those things out of the Texas Senate. The Texas House, in contrast, has not passed any legislation. So when you're looking at these committees, one thing to kind of be watching for in the Texas House is, are these committees having hearings on big things or small things? Mm-hmm. And that's going to give you a sense of where leadership is going. Speaking of big things moving in the Texas House in terms of committee hearings, not floor action. But Brandon, this week we have the Texas House considering bail reform, which has been a priority for the governor, actually a priority for a lot of Texans, particularly those in the Houston area have seen kind of the abuses of the bail system, now trying to rein some of that in. What legislation is moving this week in committee?
Well, this afternoon, the House Criminal Jurisprudence Committee is going to meet to consider some bail reform measures that are very similar. Actually, some of the measures are identical to what's already passed out of the Senate, dealing with two main things here. One is making it so that violent criminal offenders, are not let out on bail like we've seen so often, where you've seen violent offenders let out, you've seen illegal aliens let out, and they go commit more crimes, right? We certainly have seen this in a lot of tragic cases across the state, but especially in areas like Houston, like the big cities.
Right.
That's one of the pieces that they're going to be looking at. That's being authored by John Smithy, who's the chair now of the House Criminal Jurisprudence Committee. Which, keep in mind, this is interesting. Just last session, you had a Democrat, a radical Democrat, in charge of that committee. I think that tells you, why those bills didn't pass through last time. Maybe might have a better chance this time. And then you've also got another piece of legislation being heard in that same committee today that would prevent cities from using tax dollars to fund these essentially these bail get out of jail bail groups that are charities, so to speak, that let people out of jail, that give people bail money. That would be something that would be stopped under this legislation, as well as a whole host of other things that they're hearing in the Criminal Jurisprudence Committee today. But this is a priority, like you said, for Governor Greg Abbott. It's something that the Senate moved on a long time ago,
very
frankly,
early,
at this point.
Yeah.
And it's something that is one of the first priorities we've really seen be at least heard in a committee in the Texas House. I think right now it's bail reform, property tax, and school choice have all had committee hearings so far.
Yeah, the George Soros funded left wing Texas Tribune is today have set their hair on fire, Brandon, because apparently Texans have lost faith and confidence after COVID. Apparently, after being hit by a baseball bat, people don't want to have others approach them with baseball bats.
Yeah, a little distrustful of authority they're promoting.
Yeah. And then they had that article running today in part because you have hearings on legislation that would give Texans more control, more say. In the past, I think a lot of us just kind of accepted these mandates about vaccines without much thought. But yet now you've got a lot of Texans after COVID saying, "Wait a second, you're pushing an agenda here." Tell us about some of this legislation.
Yeah, so this is a bill by Senator Bob Hall. It's going to be heard this afternoon in the Senate Health and Human Services Committee that deals with informed consent. Essentially, if children are going to be vaccinated, are parents going to have all the information they need to make those decisions? This is an issue that predates COVID. Certainly, you've had groups like Texans for Vaccine Choice that have been talked about. Texas for Vaccine Choice was in many ways founded around this idea of trying to promote legislation like this, dealing with informed consent for vaccines. But it really was COVID, I think, that put a lot of attention on the issue. It's got people's minds sort of shifting on it. And look, I think it's interesting to see where we are now, where even at the federal level, you have Robert F. Kennedy, who's the head of the Department of Health up there, and so big shift on that. That's going to be heard later today, and that's by Bob Hall.
One of maybe my favorite, and this, look, I get this is very petty. This is very petty, but one of my favorite pieces of legislation, I think it's going to be heard tomorrow in the House State Affairs Committee by State Representative Briscoe Kane, a Republican from Deer Park, that would essentially strip the city of Austin of its city status and turn the seat of state government into the district of Austin.
Well, it's not a bad idea, frankly.
It's not a bad idea.
When you look at what the legislature has had to do time and time again, there's been a significant amount of time and energy each session trying to fix whatever wild mistake the city of Austin has made, whether it was the homeless camping ordinance that allowed vagrants to camp out in front of people's houses, lie on the street, wherever, without consequence. Whether it was the ride-sharing ban that kept Uber and Lyft out of the city for a year until they fixed that. Even when you look at some of these other things, even the issues like I'm talking about, like the bail issue, right, is something that Austin's been guilty of. It might save everybody some time if they just said, you know what, City of Austin obviously can't be trusted with the far leftists that control the city council, and maybe it's not such a wild idea for the state legislature to actually take control of the capital city, not unlike you see to an extent in Washington, D.C. So that'll be heard tomorrow, and I can't wait to see what the testimony looks like on that. Maybe someone from the city of Austin will come.
I suspect you're going to have the city council and their friends setting their hair on fire, which is always kind of fun to watch anyway. Okay, so Brandon, we don't usually talk national news, but today is possibly a big day with President Trump announcing that the JFK files are going to be released. I guess you're giddy with anticipation there to find out what role Ted Cruz had to play in being on the 7th grassy knoll or whatever the concert there was.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be interesting. I'm always cautious with these sorts of things. We'll see. I'm not going to believe it. How much is redacted? See what we have when it comes out. But it should make some interesting reading. Hopefully those get released here soon.
All right. Hey, thanks for being with us here on The Advance. We look forward to seeing you around the Lone Star State, or at a minimum right here next Tuesday.
Thank you.